Marvel has a new show called Ironheart, and people are saying this is the worst Marvel series ever produced. Over a month ago, I talked about it when the trailer dropped, and I was amongst the haters. I thought it looked bad. And by the way, I wasn't even planning on reviewing this series. I was perfectly content going from Thunderbolts to the Fantastic Four. But then I saw a headline reading how the series got reviewed bombed, and then went on to shame people stating, "You're racist if you don't like it." Which I always think is an interesting strategy to immediately blame the audience when something is failing. Now, obviously, there are going to be a couple of gooners who won't be receptive to something because of trivial matters like race. That does exist, but I would argue that's not the majority of fans of a product, because if that was the case, other franchises like Into the Spider-Verse and Black Panther would have flopped. But both are highly acclaimed by fans and consumers. They're great projects, not just within the MCU, but in general. So I don't think you can immediately point the finger at racism being the reason why Ironheart is flopping. But they seem to really believe in it, and I didn't think it could be worse than She-Hulk. So I watched all 6 episodes. And now I can say with confidence, She-Hulk is still worse. Ironheart's not great, but it does have some things that are good. I'll start with what's good, actually, because that'll be nice and short. I actually really like how the series builds tension. There are some surprisingly dark moments in this series, and I think they did a great job establishing stakes and setting up a highly anticipated character, who I'll talk about later in the video. Sure, there's not a lot of it, but when it's there, it's at least a refreshing break from this stale formula Marvel has run into the ground, and a nice palate cleanser from the show's terrible writing. Now, Ironheart actually has a bit of an interesting story. Not the actual series itself, but the background and everything leading up to it. It's a comic book character that was created back in 2016 with the sole purpose of continuing Tony Stark's legacy. But it flopped, not because the character was bad, but because 2016 was just a rough year for Marvel Comics. Flash forward to 2022, with the premiere of Wakanda Forever, Ironheart makes her MCU debut. So, Ironheart was Marvel's attempt to help flesh out the character, but the series was so poorly received during testings that the executives were debating whether or not to even release it. Eventually, though, they decided to delay it to 2025, and I guess shorten it to only 6 episodes. Which might have been for the best, because they were on the verge of having to pull a pseudo-Morbius. Right off rip, episode 1 is the most boring episode of the series. It mainly focuses on our protagonist, Riri Williams, as well as laying out some of the other characters in the series. I'll talk about them in a moment, but first, I want to establish mine and pretty much everyone else's biggest criticism from the series. It heavily piggybacks off Iron Man. Aforementioned, Ironheart was a comic book character created for the sole purpose of picking up where Tony left off. But this series executes that in the most disrespectful way possible. Literally, the first 5 minutes of episode 1 are just exposition dumping, trying to get us to care about this character with no nuance. And within the first 10 seconds, she's just boasting about how she's better than every other genius character we've seen in the MCU. And by the first minute, the now infamous "Tony Stark wouldn't be Tony Stark if he wasn't a billionaire" line gets said. I'm not going to play the Obadiah meme, but everyone knows Tony Stark is what made Tony Stark a billionaire. It wasn't his wealth that made him successful, it was his success that made him wealthy. So Riri tries to continue Tony's legacy by mass-producing Iron Man suits for first responders so that they'll never be a minute late in an emergency. Now, while I do think that's a creative take on her character, the question needs to be asked, why? Keep in mind, the comic book and MCU take place in separate universes. Riri and Tony never had a single interaction in the MCU. Now, I know the initial plan was to have Peter Parker take on the mantle, and we all know how that plan fell through. But her reason, it just feels like lazy writing. She states it's because her late stepdad was a fan of Tony Stark, and it was her way of being close to him. then later explains it was the only way she felt safe after his demise. Now, credit where credit is due, that is creative, but it still doesn't make sense. It's not like her stepdad was best buds with Mr. Stark having brewskis on the regular. If she's trying to follow in the footsteps of Tony, she's doing a terrible job. Part of Tony's character was how he didn't want the Iron Man suit to be made public due to concerns of potential misuse. She also repeats how she wants to make something iconic, yet is fixated on building something that already exists. Everyone in the series acknowledges this, yet she still continues to make Iron Man, which, if this is the same timeline, should be protected under S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't know, it wasn't until the end of episode 5 that she finally starts to do something different by incorporating magic into the suit, which I guess is a justifiable change. But what I don't think there's a justification for is why they made Riri Williams go down a path of crime. Back in Chicago now, she joins a gang of street thugs, and these are about the most Oscar bait, well, technically Emmy baited characters I've ever seen. It really feels like they took a page out of Emilia Perez when writing them, because they are very stereotypical. They're all a bunch of societal outcasts, people who society is trying to keep down and out of the spotlight. Most of them are uninteresting, but I guess they are integral to the overall plot. Now, the reason why she's resorting to thievery and criminal activity to help fund her project is because she was expelled from MIT, which was entirely her fault, by the way. For some reason, she was trying to make extra money by selling school projects to university students, even though she was already able to build the Ironheart with just funding from the university. Why did she do that? She was able to make the suit without a side hustle, and on top of that, she was able to make the Mark I with the help of the Wakandans. Unless I'm missing some crucial piece of information, for someone who claims to be smarter than Tony Stark, you made a really stupid decision, Riri. You had the fundings and the connections, and comparatively were in a much better position than Tony was when he developed the Mark I, so why the f*** did you handicap yourself? That's not a fault of society, that's a fault of yours. So jumping straight to episode 3, I think this is where the series peaked. It's still not great, but it finally gave us insight to what they were setting up. Meesto. I didn't know he was in this series until I did some external research, because why the f*** would they bother to include him in a series they were hesitant on releasing? Truth be told, I didn't know Parker was supposed to be the Hood. I thought they were teasing this guy, the Cloak, from Marvel Comics' The Cloak and Dagger. I didn't even know there was such a character called the Hood, just like how I'm sure none of y'all knew about the Cloak until just now. It really doesn't help that they both use magic, and the Cloak does connect to the Dark Dimension, which I initially thought they were teasing. I'm not even a huge comic book nerd. I only know about the Cloak because I made that video essay 2 years ago where I talked about the Spot after I saw Across the Spider-Verse. But my brain immediately went there because A, there was no early indication that there was any kind of external presence like Meesto, only that the powers came from the Hood, and B, why would they have him debut in Ironheart? It feels out of place. I wouldn't care if it was the Cloak or if they solely focused on the Hood, because I'm sure nobody else would. They'd at least have everything to gain and nothing to lose. But Meesto, this is a villain whose MCU debut was 4 years in the making. WandaVision, Loki, Deadpool, Wolverine, Agatha all along. They had so many better opportunities to debut this major antagonist, yet they chose this series? It really feels like they did this because it was the only way for the series to have even an iota of success. Meesto is great. He is the only thing Ironheart has riding on its shoulders. But it is a pretty big weight to carry. Most of the writing, though, falls super flat. Even when you have characters that could work, they're pretty one-dimensional. And some of the traits just don't work within the established lore. For example, one of the key characters is the son of Obadiah Stane, the actual first villain of the MCU and rival to Tony Stark. I'm sure you can figure out why they included him in this series, but his whole personality is not wanting to end up like his dad. Which, spoilers, he does. And he says so himself, in case you couldn't figure that out while watching. Another example is Riri and how she's just completely dismissive of the concept of magic and that there might be a sinister presence within the hood. Then in the following episode, episode 3, she finally decides she wants to analyze the hood after seeing how protective another member was of it. So you didn't trust your AI assistant, and even after witnessing the powers for yourself and knowing supernatural occurrences like this happen all the time within your universe, what finally made you want to take action was after seeing the response of an average Joe. What? And by the way, the climax of the episode involves Riri trying to take a sample of the hood so she can run a diagnostics of it. But she does this in the stupidest way possible. She tries to get a sample while Parker is wearing it in the middle of a heist. I don't know how you can write someone this dumb. She had the hood at the beginning of the episode. She knows Parker takes it off at some point. She could have tried to get a sample literally at any other point outside of the one instance he would be wearing it. Because f***ing obviously. So episode 3 ends with Riri botching the heist and ends up killing one of the members through carbon monoxide poisoning. Again, I think this show has some surprisingly dark moments, and even during the heist, it was cool watching the hood go all out with their powers. But you want to know what's crazy? Riri doesn't seem to care a whole lot that she killed someone. Episodes 4 and 5 are pretty generic. Riri tries to fix her suit and figure out the hood's source of power. She has a falling out with her AI best friend. Meanwhile, the hood continues to grow more powerful and sends his crew after Riri to try and kill her. He recruits Ezekiel Stain because he wants revenge after Riri got him arrested and his identity exposed. So he turns him into a cyberpunk and he manages to destroy her suit. So Riri recruits a bunch of side characters to help her build a new one before the final fight. Now the final episode focuses on Riri facing off against the hood. And we're actually given the backstory to how Parker acquired it. This is the first time we see Meesto visible on screen. And all things considered, it went about as good as it could get in Ironheart. He promised Parker fame and fortune beyond his satisfaction and left him with the hood. Flash forward to the present, and Parker has achieved everything he set out to do, but is still left unsatisfied. So he finally summons Meesto again, who promises him as long as he doesn't take off the hood, he will be satisfied, and then proceeds to give him a stat boost before the final fight. Meanwhile, Riri has just finished making the Ironheart Mark III out of a 1971 Plymouth Cuda using equipment in her stepdad's chop shop. So after the suit gets enchanted with magic, which by the way is a very convenient plot point because her mom was friends with someone who trained under the masters of the mystic arts and taught her daughter how to use magic. Because why the f*** not? The plot called for it. But anyways, Riri now has the suit with an infinite power source and is ready to take on the hood. So after her rematch against Cyberpunk Stain, she and Parker duke it out. It's very flashy and well choreographed, but the hood gets the upper hand. And in a last-ditch Hail Mary, Ironheart self-destructs in an attempt to take them both out. But it fails. They both survive, and Riri is now defenseless. Declaring victory, Parker pulls out his gun and shoots her. But then big reveal, it was all an illusion. Ironheart was standing behind him the whole time, and before he could react, she jerks the hood off of Parker, leaving him powerless and suffering from withdrawal. So that was their whole confrontation. I'm making this sound more exciting than it was. It was about as predictable as you imagined. Though the inclusion of magic actually came out of f***ing nowhere. I could have predicted the hood would go down after he was stripped of his cloak, but I don't know why Riri needed to use magic if she wasn't going to destroy it. But that's not where this episode ends, because now that Riri has taken possession of the hood, she gets greeted by Meesto. And I'm being sincere when I say he is the only thing that gave this series any nuance. So, Meesto is talking about his legacy. He states Riri is someone who comes once in a generation and then offers her a deal, showing her that she has the opportunity to make something iconic. Now, normally I think this is about the most cliche way of ending something because this horror trope has been done dozens of times. But in the case of Ironheart, I think it's a fitting ending. So the season ends with Riri taking a deal from the devil, and everything we saw was implied to have happened. I cut out quite a bit because most of it wasn't integral to the overall plot. Like, I guess there were some things I could have delved deeper into, but you're not going to care. I just wanted to see if this series could stand on its own, and the answer is a resounding no. If this didn't tie into the MCU, nobody would watch it. And even knowing how it could have huge implications in the franchise going forward, it was just very messy getting to the end. Like, the first half was wildly different from the second. I think the whole concept of tech versus magic could have been great if they had done a better job at balancing it. The first 3 episodes were so heavily tech-based that by the time you got to the second half, there's this huge shift in narrative, and now it heavily focuses on magic. Things only happen because the plot calls for it. Like that convenient plot point where Riri's mom knew an enchantress. I don't even think some of the characters are bad. They just didn't know how to write them. It's so easy to draw comparisons between Tony Stark and Riri Williams, but they are just fundamentally 2 very different characters in terms of writing. Tony Stark is a flawed character. Yes, he did some bad things, but he was good at heart, and over the course of time, he changed. Until eventually, he made the ultimate sacrifice. Riri Williams is just a bad character. Off rip, we see how unlikable she is, and she keeps making bad decisions without ever really having that shift in moral compass. They just keep repeating the same lines of, "I'm not a criminal, you're a good person," without anything to back it. Which is why it's unsurprising that by the end, she makes a deal with the devil. It's clear they left things ambiguous in case of a season 2, which nobody wants. Not even the executives want a season 2. They didn't even want this season. They barely made the cutoff for episodes required to not be labeled as a miniseries. So I'm pretty confident it's going to end here. Though I hope this isn't the end of Meesto's story. I think Marvel really has something to work with here going into Phase 6. Sure, it isn't the best place to start, but a villain succeeded. And that has huge implications in a superhero franchise. But anyways, that about wraps up my review of Ironheart. It's not great, but it's definitely not the worst thing Marvel has made. There were some good moments, and I just wanted to talk about it, since everyone seemed so against this series. That's really about it. So,